All right, great. Okay, just wanted to get started and want to quickly introduce myself to you guys. My name is Schuyler Jackson, and as you can see on the screen, I'm the National Real Estate Manager, or one of the National Real Estate Managers for McDonald's Corporation. And today I'm just going to be presenting to you guys a little bit about McDonald's, how our system works, and also some details on how we look at real estate from an overall standpoint, and also maybe a couple of site-specific type details. If you guys have any questions along the way, feel free to put them in the chat box. I'll take a look at that periodically. And if there are, again, questions that come up, I'll try to answer them. As far as the agenda today, I want to go over 5 main things. First things are things that you may not know about McDonald's. Second is our system and how it works. And third is global development. Fourth, development structure. And finally, fifth is our development process. I'll go to the next slide. There you go. Okay, things you didn't know about McDonald's. First, couple some fun facts. In 1937, McDonald's brothers, the actual McDonald's brothers, opened up the first McDonald's restaurant in San Bernardino, California. And in the mid-50s, Ray Kroc, who is pretty much known to most of the world as the guy that started McDonald's, actually opened up the first restaurant in the system. He franchised that from the McDonald's brothers back in the mid-50s. By 1965, he had built up that system to 500 restaurants. By the late 70s, he had multiplied that by 10 and had over 5,000 restaurants. We had over 25,000 by the turn of the century, and we opened up our first restaurant in Vietnam in 2013, and by 2021, we were celebrating our 50th anniversary with restaurants in Netherlands, Japan, Germany, Australia, Costa Rica, and Panama. So over the years, over the decades, we've grown exponentially. As far as McDonald's today, we have well over 39,000 restaurants worldwide. We're located in over 120 countries, and we serve approximately 70 million customers on a daily basis throughout the world. So we have quite a bit of reach in terms of our global reach and the number of customers that we service. We are truly an international brand. As far as our economic impact goes, as I said in the previous slide, we serve about 70 million customers a day. That translates to about 25 million customers in the United States alone. Recently, over the last couple of years, we've invested close to $6 billion, in our U.S. restaurants. Throughout the U.S., between our company-owned restaurants, our corporate headquarters, and our franchise locations, we employ about 800,000 people in just the United States alone. And also, since 2015 in the United States, we've given away over $48 million in tuition assistance through our Archways to Opportunities program. As far as our impact locally and within California, as you can see, we have purchased just about $320 million worth of supplies. That includes food and other types of supplies. And this was taken from, last time we took this was, I believe, in 2016, this information. We have purchased over 104 million pounds of beef. We employ almost 100,000 people just in the state of California alone, and we have about just under 1,300 restaurants within the state of California. Now on to our system. Our system is based on 3 main principles, and we call it our 3-legged stool. And it's a combination of our suppliers, our owner operators, and of course our employees. So all of them work in combination with one another to basically make sure that what you see when you walk into a McDonald's restaurant happens every single day, not only just the food that's served, but how the restaurant looks, how we get the food and other supplies to the restaurant. You know, it's all coordinated to make sure that, you know, what you see when you walk in the restaurant happens and occurs every single day. Now, as far from a real estate standpoint, McDonald's as a landlord, what we do as a corporation is we go out and we find the sites and we also develop them. So when you're driving by the street and you see a McDonald's, the corporation, McDonald's Corporation, either owns that property or we're ground leasing it from the underlying property owner. And the building that you see there, the restaurant, that was developed by McDonald's Corporation. We give the restaurants or award the restaurants to a franchisees, typically a 20-year franchise agreement. Typically, they will be there for at least 20 years, most of the time even longer, because our agreements, or excuse me, our property that we own, or if we ground lease it, we'll typically ground lease it for at least 40 years, sometimes up to 60 years, depending upon how we can negotiate it. Okay, on to our global development. As I said earlier, McDonald's is located in right now 120 countries. It's probably more than that now, based on this slide. The slide might be a little bit old, but I know that we're in at least 120 countries. And as you can see, most of those are here in North America, South America, and in Western Europe, and also in Asia as well, and Australia. So we still, as you can see, have quite a bit to go in terms of expansion. Just to kind of give you an idea of that, one of the things that we always hear is like there seems to be McDonald's everywhere, and especially when you look at it here in Southern California, we do have a lot of McDonald's. But when you break it out throughout, say, the United States, we have McDonald's that are located within 2 miles of about 218 million people within the U.S., whereas our total population in the U.S. through to 324 million is actually probably about 330 million now. When you look at that overall, we are covering about 67% of the United States in terms of having a McDonald's located within 2 miles of the majority of the population. So what that tells us from a big macro aspect is that there's still quite a bit of room to grow in terms of where we open up the restaurants. And also you have to remember that for a company like McDonald's that has been here in the United States for many decades, population shifts, demographic shifts have happened during that time period. You know, from the time that McDonald's started in the mid-50s till now, you've had big population shifts in the West, in the Southwest, and in the Southeast. So those are areas where we may have obviously had restaurants, but not as many as we need now, because those populations in those areas are growing a lot more than they did in the past. So we have to make sure that we keep up with that type of population growth. Kind of give you an idea of how our restaurants looked like in the past. And by in the past, I mean probably at least 10, 20 years ago. McDonald's had a very distinctive roof line, which we called a mansard roof. And we just didn't design it that way just to design it that way. It was meant to make it easy for customers to pick McDonald's out of the crowd of other restaurant chains or restaurant buildings, because that roof was a very distinctive roof line. People were able to see it. They knew it was a McDonald's, even if we weren't able in some instances to put our signage on the building. Going to present day, most of the McDonald's that you'll see nowadays look more like this. more of a streamlined type building. We've done away with the mansard roof line, and we typically rely on what we call our arches. And no, it's not an M. It's actually two arches that are put together. So those arches now, because we have been around and we for many decades, a lot of people, when they see those arches, they know that they're seeing or going to a McDonald's. Similar to if you see the red bullseye that Target has, you know, a lot of they just have that red bullseye and you know, oh, okay, that's a Target. Well, it's the same thing with us. So we've been able to change the design of our building to adapt to that. And many times from a real estate standpoint, we're limited with the amount of signage that we can actually use on our building and on the entire site. So sometimes we're not able to put the word McDonald's on the building or on our sign because the city doesn't allow us to have that much signage. So by being able to just use the arches, folks know that when they're driving, you know, or walking, they know that they're coming to a McDonald's. And again, just to kind of give you a highlight on some of the unique McDonald's that we have, not only here in the US, but in other parts of the world. In Times Square, we have our flagship station, our flagship restaurant. In Walt Disney World, this restaurant that I'm showing here, we actually opened this last year, just prior to the pandemic starting. And this restaurant is, you know, it's really based on using 100% of the environment. So all of the power, everything that's used to run that restaurant comes entirely from the environment. It's not gas powered at all. So it's very unique restaurant, and hopefully we can replicate that throughout the system in the coming years. All right, on to real estate development structure. This chart here just kind of shows you how the various elements within our real estate structure and how we use that to make our company run in terms of not only new development, but also ongoing management of our existing restaurant portfolio. As you can see, it's broken up in 6 different areas. The area that I'm primarily involved with is this area right here, which we call Real Estate Center of Excellence. In fact, all of them are called Center of Excellence. That's the term that we use. But the area that I'm involved in is primarily focused on new store development. So I'm the person that's going to go out, look around, drive around, get tips or information from brokers or developers or landlords on properties that potentially could be McDonald's properties. I'll go out, negotiate for the property, either whether it's a purchase or a ground lease, and then work with other departments, like say our architecture and construction department, and getting the permits necessary to be able to build that actual restaurant. We have what we call our field execution teams, which is the teams that work primarily with our franchisees, or what like we call them owner operators. And they help determine which franchisee will be awarded a restaurant. Because as I showed in the earlier slide, we award our franchisees one restaurant at a time. Some chains actually award an area to a franchisee. So they may say, hey, you know, Mr. and Mrs. So-and-so, we're going to give you all the restaurants that we open up in the city of Culver City or in the city of Inglewood. Well, McDonald's doesn't do that. We do each franchisee is awarded on an individual restaurant basis. Now, that doesn't mean that we typically don't cluster a franchisee with restaurants in a certain area because it makes it easier, but it's not a given that just because a new restaurant is coming into an area that a franchisee has a number of restaurants, it's not a given that they will be awarded that particular restaurant. They have to bid for it like any other franchisee that may be interested in that particular location. We have our strategy and analytics department. And these are the folks that really, have the statistical background. They go out and they estimate what our first year sales are. They look at all of our restaurants, not only throughout the United States, but depending upon if they are assigned international, they look at globally what our restaurant sales are doing, and they're able to help us extract what we should estimate for future restaurants based on what our existing restaurants are doing. And they use, restaurants that are in similar areas, restaurants with similar demographics in terms of income, in terms of ethnicity. They look at the work population. They run a lot of different studies to determine, hey, what do we think those sales are going to be? Or in some instances, why sales might be going down in some areas and are going up in other areas. Our McDonald's and Walmart locations, this is one that actually we're going to be phasing out. I don't know if you guys have read in the news recently, but it was reported that McDonald's is actually phasing out the restaurants that we have in Walmarts. And we've had a very good association with Walmarts over the last 30, 35 some odd years, but because of changes in business trends, the company has decided that we no longer are going to be in Walmarts. And so we're going to be phasing out that portion of our business as those leases that we have within the Walmarts expire. So, the one or two that you may see in Walmarts right now, probably in the next, 3 to 5 years, those will be gone. Then we have what we call our portfolio management division. And these are the folks that handle the restaurants after the restaurant is open. As you can imagine, when you've got 39,000 restaurants worldwide, you're going to have management issues. Sometimes things break down either within the restaurant. You may have real estate related issues, like say if you're in a shopping center and you have to deal with the shopping center landlord there on different issues that happen within the center itself. And so we have a whole department, and that's their entire job. It's just to manage what happens with our restaurants after someone like myself has gone in and done the work to actually get it open. So that's a pretty big job. It's never ending. I can go on and on. I could have a whole separate presentation on just management of our portfolio of restaurants. And again, as I mentioned earlier, our other department, architecture and construction, not only are they involved with permitting the restaurants, getting the building permits from various municipalities, but they're involved with the design of our restaurants, how the restaurants operate in terms of what we call the back of the house. And the back of the house is basically a euphemism for what happens behind the counter, in terms of how the food is prepared, making sure everything is set up to make it most optimal for our employees, making it easier for them to be able to get the food out to you when you go in and you order your Big Mac or your Quarter Pounder. Drive-through lane, how is that constructed? Making sure that the queuing lane, the stacking lane is most optimal so that we can get cars in as quickly as possible. Because on average, we're getting on the low end, about 65% of our customers are going through the drive-in. We have some restaurants where it's up to 90% or even higher. And especially with what happened last year and actually ongoing with the pandemic, that drive-through lane percentage shot up rapidly because we had to close our restaurants down to indoor dining. So folks were just using the drive-through lane. So it was really, really important with how we designed that, not only the drive-through lane, but the kitchen area itself so that they could handle that additional traffic. So when you look at a company like McDonald's and you would look at real estate, you've got lots of different areas in which you can be involved with it. Again, architecture, construction, you can use portfolio or known as property management. You have our strategic and analytics folks that just, crunch the numbers and to help us determine sales estimates. And then you have, like I said, what I do in terms of real estate is actually going out, finding sites and negotiating deals. Okay, this slide right here kind of just goes over what I was just talking about the various departments and what they do. Here are some key development positions. We have our development director, construction manager, field office expediter, portfolio manager, construction manager, our coordinators, our real estate leads, and our real estate managers. One part I didn't talk about in the other slide was our coordinators, our real estate coordinators. These people are very important to us. They basically help compile all the information that I need in order to be able to help me negotiate my deals. You know, when it comes to real estate, there's lots of things that are involved with it, not just the actual negotiation of a contract, but you have to look at title issues, you have to look at financials, you have to look at the construction, whether or not will be able to actually fit a building on a site. All these type of things come into play. And the coordinator's job is to be able to make sure that all of that documentation is not only in one bucket, but that is being looked at in the amount of the proper timing. Because a lot of times, or most of the times when we do deals, we have to hit certain dates. I've got to be able to say, hey, I checked whether or not the property has any type of environmental waste on it by a certain date. I have to check to make sure that the property is zoned for our use by a certain date. And if it's not, can I get it rezoned? There are a lot of little checkoff boxes that I have to make sure are done, and the coordinators are there to assist me to make sure that I hit those dates and that I don't forget them, because you know, I'm not working on just one deal, I'm working on a bunch of deals, and so sometimes things can be dropped. So you want to make sure that there's someone there to help pick up the ball in case that happens, and that's where our coordinators come into play. Okay, this gives you an idea of how we break up the United States with our national real estate managers. And as you can see here, we've got 16 people that handle the real estate opportunities for McDonald's. And you can see by the different color codes, we've broken them up, you know, broken up the United States based on different areas. And it depends upon, you know, not only the geography, but the number of people within an area. So the area that I handle, which is area number 2 here, which is basically LA, Orange County, Kern County, which is Bakersfield, Ventura County, Santa Barbara, San Luis Obispo County. So I'm covering an area that goes all the way up to Paso Robles. In case, I'm not sure if you guys know where that's at, but that's kind of halfway between here and San Francisco, all the way down to the edge of Orange County. So you're talking anywhere, you're probably talking about, you know, close to 15, 20 million people. Whereas you have area number 4 over here, which obviously geographically is a much larger area, but fewer people. So, you know, the person that handles this area has got to go out, they're flying all the time, they're driving around, making sure that, you know, we're covering these areas, these remote and rural areas where, you know, there's still a big need for McDonald's. And it kind of goes back again to that slide that I showed you earlier, where we got about 67% of the country covered, but there's still big areas where we don't have covered. And that's where, you know, we've got somebody on the ground checking, making sure that, you know, we didn't miss some town somewhere, and, you know, developing new restaurants. Okay, a little bit about the development process. We've got 5 stages of development when I'm looking at trying to look at a new site. Well, first stage is investigating the market. Second, investigating the actual site itself. Then it's acquiring the site either through a purchase contract or a ground lease. And the fourth is developing the site, which basically is building the restaurant. And then the fifth one is supporting the site, where our portfolio management people come into play. Okay, I investigate the market. I'm looking at a potential market, which we break up into a mini market, and that mini market has individual trade areas within that market. So as far as that goes, we look at a trade area, specific trade area, and that's divided by several items. Typically, it's divided by your drive time. We want to go no more than 5 minutes from the restaurant. And in an area like Los Angeles, where there's a lot of density and there's a lot of traffic, when you drive 5 minutes pretty much in any direction, there are a lot of people that are living within that 5 minute time period. So you can have a number of McDonald's fairly close together and still servicing enough people within that 5 minute drive time to make that restaurant profitable. When we're looking at a small town, we use a larger radius, in this case, 10 miles, and sometimes even a larger radius than that. And then in the walking area, like say downtown Los Angeles or say a downtown San Francisco, we're looking at a 5 minute trade area time. And typically you're using 5 minutes because now you're taking into account not only residents, but a lot of times office workers that are in the area, and they don't have to go as far. They only have to go 5 minutes to make it convenient for them. They've got to go, get out of work on lunchtime, go to where they need to go, and then get back. So you got to make sure that you take those type of things into account when you're thinking about your customers. Okay, being able to identify a viable trade area, we're looking for something that's a focal point within a given area. And that focal point is primarily based on how many people are living there, but we also take into account the number of workers and any major retail areas that are in that trade area, like say a shopping center, whether it be a neighborhood shopping center, whether a grocery store, or a major shopping center, like say a South Coast Plaza or Century City Mall, that type of deal. When we're selecting a site, I'm showing here, I picked a site that's kind of close to UCLA. This particular site, this area right here is what we call a development pin. This doesn't necessarily mean that a site is going to go at this exact spot, but it's an area where we know that we're looking to try to put a restaurant in. So if we don't have this specific site, we'll put what we call, like I said, a development pin in the area to show that, hey, we want to find something that's in and around this area to try to develop a new store. And again, as I mentioned earlier, with the Los Angeles area, our trade areas are about 5 minutes in terms of drive time. So as you guys know, in and around UCLA or the West LA area, there's a zillion people over there. When you talk about the people that not only live, but also the people that work in the office buildings, there's just a ton of people. So because of that, it allows you to be able to have the restaurants closer together and still make them profitable. So the color distinctions here are basically these blue ones are company-owned restaurants, and this one happens to be a franchise-owned restaurant. Okay, again, when I'm looking at sites, the main three things I'm focusing in on are the home element, work element, and shop element. Out of those three, the most important one is the home, because those folks are the ones that are there pretty much all of the time, especially in the evening, and they're the ones that are going to hit the restaurant in terms of going and buying more on a more consistent basis. The workers, they're great to have, but most of the time in the evening, they're gone. So you have to take that into account when you're doing your sales analysis and sales estimates to make sure that you're not giving too much of a share of your sales to your workers. And the same thing goes with the shop. The shoppers are there frequently, depending upon where your location is at. Say if you have a McDonald's located in what we would call a neighborhood shopping center where you have a grocery store, those customers are going to come more frequently because they're going to the market or they might be going to the dry cleaners or some other type of convenient use. If you're located, have the McDonald's located on a major shopping center, like say, West Coast, South Coast Plaza, they're going to go less frequently because they're going there to buy maybe something for, a dress or something like that, or holidays or what have you. So again, it's fine to have that. You just have to make sure that when you're calculating your sales estimate, you take that into account. Okay, when I'm investigating a specific site, I make sure that I look at the site position, the site rating, and the site characteristics. The main thing you want to do is when you're looking at a site is you want it to be convenient for people to be able to drive in and out without that much of a hassle. The more access points that you can give customers to get into a site, the better. The easier in terms of the flow of the drive-through lane so that customers can easily get into a drive-through lane and come back out. It's better. It makes it more convenient. When it's more convenient, people tend to come back more often. When they have problems having to get into the site or having to get out of the site, it's not that they won't come back, but people will remember that and they'll say, well, I might go down to the Wendy's or to the Jack in the Box because it's easier to get in there. And especially when you're driving in LA, we all know how the traffic is. And if you can get in some place quick and fast, that's what you want to try to do. And so when I'm out driving and I'm out looking at sites, those are the type of things that I'm thinking about. Okay, this is kind of just a quick overview of the various things that I have to incorporate when I'm investigating a site and looking at it and to determine whether or not it's a location that can work for us. And due diligence, just to take, for instance, due diligence could mean making sure I have a phase 1 environmental report to make sure that there's no type of hazardous materials on the site. And if there are, I've got to go back to the property owner and tell them, hey, you've got to get rid of that stuff before we can move forward. I've got to make sure there are no type of title issues. There may be an easement on the site from the local electric company or water company that goes right through the middle of the site. And just to give you kind of an example, if you have, like, say, a sewer line, and you guys are aware of sewer lines, like the sewer lines that bust around UCLA and all that water goes everywhere, right? So if you've got a sewer line that's coming down right in the middle of your site, you can't put your building on top of it because the utility company, they always have the right to be able to come in and make any kind of repairs that they want to that line. And if you didn't check the title report to make sure that you were aware of that and you placed a building on top of it, you could get on the knock on the door from the utility company saying, hey, you know what? We're going to have to bury a hole inside your restaurant because we got to get to that sewer line that's underground. And there's nothing that you can do about that. So that's why you got to make sure that you check these things that are big things, but if you're checking them and you're doing them correctly, they become little things because you're aware of it and you can work around it. And finally, I wanted to talk about McDonald's in terms of the strength of our McDonald's signature. And one of the things I just kind of want to briefly talk about is this term right here called cap rate, which is short for capitalization rate. When companies or leases are being valued, if you sign a lease as a company, as a McDonald's versus another company, investors are going to look at the value of the company that's behind signing that lease. Because McDonald's has been around so long, because McDonald's is such a strong company, our cap rate is low. And the way cap rates work, they're kind of like bonds. The lower your cap rate, the stronger of a company you are in terms of investment. So if McDonald's were to sign a lease and we have a starting rent of $85,000, our cap rate in this example is at 4.1%. Currently, our cap rates are running about 3 to 3.5% in California. But for this example, we're going to use 4.1%. So basically you would divide this 4.1% into the 85,000 to give you a lease value of a little over $2 million. Now, say if you were using some of our other competitors that weren't quite as strong, they're going to be valued at a higher cap rate, which subsequently would mean that their value of their lease is less than the value of a McDonald's lease. So what that gives for me from a negotiating standpoint is I can go to a landlord and say, hey, I need to be able to pay a lower lease because at the end of the day, my cap rate will justify having either the same or even a higher lease value. But by being able to pay a lower lease, it gives me a higher profitability on the operating end. So that's where having a company like McDonald's and being able to, have the strength of a McDonald's lease comes into play. And finally, like I was saying at the beginning, part of our three-legged stool, a big part of that is our employees. And as a company, McDonald's offers a lot of great benefits for our employees. We have a great value system, as you can see, our 5 main pillars of our value system down here. And we do quite a bit in terms of how we affect the planet, the type of things that we're doing for the environment, what we're doing for packaging, what we're doing in terms of making sure we're using as little of our forests that we can for our packaging, our supplies, that type of thing. We're very conscious of that as a company. And so from an employment standpoint, I'm being biased, but I think it's a great company to work for. But for students like yourself, there's lots of different avenues that you can work on the real estate side, as I pointed out, whether it be actual deal making like I do, whether you're doing construction, design, and architecture, you're working in statistics with our analytics department or portfolio management. So that's kind of the end of my presentation. I know you guys may have some questions, and I want to make sure that I get to those, if you do have some.
So I was just wondering regarding the like real estate, what do you usually look for when it comes to I guess like traffic or like feasibility?
We do look at traffic in terms of actual traffic counts at an intersection. That is something that we do take into play. It's not one of the it's not on the high end in terms of when we're doing our checklist of, this is very important to us. Again, the main thing that we're looking at is how many people live in the area, which we call the home designation, how many people are working and how many people are shopping. If an area has high traffic, then that's just a bonus for us. Sometimes though, depending upon how your site is located at, having a lot of traffic can actually be a bad thing, because sometimes you have so much traffic at an intersection, it makes it hard for people to get in and out. And depending upon the customer, people get frustrated and they don't want to deal with it at all. So if you're at an intersection that has a lot of traffic, you really, in an ideal situation, want to be able to have a large lot, have multiple access points for people to be able to get it in and out. And in an ideal situation, you want to be in what's called the far position. And the far position is having your restaurant located behind the signal. If you have a restaurant located right at the signal light, when people are trying to get out of the site, all the traffic's backed up and it's hard for them to get out. They get mad and they say, I don't know if I want to do this again. But if you're on the other side of the light, after the light, then it's a stopgap. So when the light's red, it allows people to have a chance to get in and get out, and it makes it easier and it makes it a better flow. Now, you're always able to get that? No, you can't. And so you have to make that compromise as to whether or not that site is important for you enough to still be there. So hopefully that answered your question.
No, I did. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions?
Yes. Yes, I have a question, Mr. Jackson. My question is like how to apply or how to obtain McDonald's franchise.
Well, I don't handle the franchising part of it, but we do have a department that handles that. And they, you can go onto our website and they can, go under the franchising and they'll tell you all about it in terms of how you can apply for it, the criteria that's needed in terms of not only the actual funds, but what they're looking for in terms of what do you have any experience in restaurant business? You don't have to have experience in it, but it helps. But the main thing they're looking for are people that are very enthusiastic about the company. That's the big thing is you want to be, you kind of live and breathe McDonald's. As people call it, you have ketchup in your veins. But again, if you go to our website and just type in franchising, information will pop up and letting you know what you would need in terms of the criteria for trying to become a franchisee.
All right, thank you.
No problem.
And I have a lot of one question is like I noticed that McDonald's is really popular in Asia. So in Asia, people actually I was growing up in China, so I know that people like they usually not they like rice. They like rice a lot.
Mm-hmm.
So I was wondering how McDonald's like so successful in Asia. Like how does the restaurant change
well
culture?
McDonald's, when we go into different countries, we look at what folks are eating in those specific countries. And while we don't change our entire menu, we try to incorporate some of the local foods that folks eat and put them on our menu. We have our McDonald's at our corporate headquarters in Chicago. And at that McDonald's, we have our restaurant at the bottom of that building. And if you ever have a chance to go there, we serve McDonald's items that we serve throughout the world. So you get a chance to get a flavor of what we may be serving in China or what we may be serving in Australia, different foods. But the one thing that we have that's constant with McDonald's is that our basic menu item, Big Mac, Quarter Pounder, you're going to find that throughout the world. And the one thing that McDonald's strives for and makes sure is that same Quarter Pounder that you're going to eat in Chicago or Los Angeles or Westwood, it's going to taste the same if you are in Beijing or if you are in, London, what have you. That's one of the main thrusts that we try to do. But again, as far as our popularity in Asia, it's pretty much the same throughout the world. And I think that's really based on the fact that people know when they go into McDonald's, they're going to, if they get a Big Mac, like I said, it's going to be the same in Beijing as it is here in LA.
All right, thank you, Mr. Jackson.
You're welcome.
I have a question. How did you end up working in the position that you have right now at McDonald's? Like, what was your path like?
My plan when I was at UCLA, because I didn't mention I am a UCLA grad. I graduated in the winter of 1990. I wanted to be in real estate and I wanted to do real estate law. And I was not able to do real estate law, which I'm kind of glad because I'm glad I didn't become a lawyer. Nothing wrong about lawyers, but they didn't end up being that way. But I first got into mortgage brokering and doing that. But then I said I really wanted to get in on the commercial side of real estate. And so I went back to school, and I actually went to that school across the town. We won't say it's the 3 letters, because at that time, they were one of the only few schools throughout the entire US that had a graduate program in real estate development. So I went to USC, and I went through their graduate program. And immediately after that, I was able to get a job at McDonald's. I started working for them as an intern. And then from there, they offered me a position as a real estate representative, and I started working for them. And I worked for McDonald's because this is actually my second stint with McDonald's. I worked for McDonald's for about 7 years. And then from there, I started working in residential real estate. I worked for Syntex Homes and R. Stone Smith. And then I came back, worked for other retailers, Smart and Final, that you might know, where I did work for them. I worked for a company called Grocery Outlet and a few other companies. And then I came back to McDonald's about a year ago because one, it's a great company to work for. And, I fit right in, and that's kind of how I got to where I'm at. And that's more, I would say, the corporate route. Other ways that you can get into real estate is you can work for brokerage firms like a CBRE and, learning how real estate deals are done that way. But the main premise is that regardless if you're working in retail, residential, and the way you analyze real estate is all the same. It's, from a financial standpoint, it just depends upon who your customer is. So in industrial, your customer may be an Amazon, because they're looking for industrial buildings all over the place. So you got to make sure that you have a building that's big enough where there's enough docks where they can have all the trucks going in and out, and, where is it located at? Is it close enough to where they can get to, that last mile destination? If it's residential, where is it located at in terms of, are you looking for apartments? Are you looking for single family homes? And what's the land value involved? So if I would take nothing away from this conversation, you have to know about land value, because land value determines what your profit is. So that's the short run of how I got to where I'm at today. And I would say that I've had a very successful career in real estate. I've really enjoyed it. I get to meet people. I'm not just in the office. I get to go out, drive around. Some companies I've had to fly in different places, so it's been very exciting.
I have a question regarding, I'm personally interested in pursuing a career in commercial real estate, but it's the first time I kind of hear someone talk about the corporate side of real estate, which is quite interesting. And my question is, what made you get into the corporate side of real estate instead of you mentioned you worked in the brokerage side, did you?
Yeah, I did mortgage brokering, and that's kind of commission only.
Yeah.
And at the time that I was doing it, I had a wife and a kid, so I needed a paycheck every 2 weeks.
But what about the investment side, maybe private equity? Did you ever consider that, or that?
I thought about that, but by the time I started getting my career going, I kind of had a resume background that was more tailored towards doing deal making. And so, like I said, but that being said, I don't have to just work in retail. Like I said, I've worked in residential because you have to do deal making there. You have to negotiate. If you're working for, say, a Syntex Homes, you got to negotiate a property on 10, 20, or 30 acre piece of land. And you got to be able to go through the entitlements of subdividing that for each individual house. Each individual house is its own permitting. And so tract homes, all that kind of things, that's a different type of real estate, but the financing and the mechanics of determining whether or not you can do the deal all comes down to the same thing. What's the land value? How much profit you're trying to get? How much is it going to take to build that house? How much money is it going to take to build that McDonald's? And incorporating all of that into basically your spreadsheet to come out with a profit. And depending upon the company, they're going to have different thresholds for their profit. Some companies will take as much, as little of a 10% return. Some companies want 20+%, so it just depends. But once you know it, and once you have know the basics in terms of how to analyze a deal, you can work in pretty much any field of real estate.
Okay, very interesting. And I guess follow-up question to that would be, how's the kind of the growth potential in the corporate side of real estate in terms of career-wise? How do you see it like growing, maybe compared to like the more like finance side, like, you know, like investments or like.
I would say it's very good. I mean, it has changed over the years, especially on the retail side. When I first started in the late 90s, the internet was, it was a baby. And people, the biggest thing was being able to use Google. The whole Amazon thing hadn't really started back then. So it's been a big change on that end of it. But there's still a need for people to go out and buy things. People are still going to shopping center. People are still, going to the drive-through lane. People are still buying homes. Amazon, these other companies, they need industrial. So there's always a need for real estate. And again, once you have the basic financials down and know how to analyze deals, you can go almost into any type of area of real estate. That's the great thing that I like about, real estate as a whole. You're not just stuck in any one area.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for the insight.
Okay. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Sure.
One thing I would like to know is, given like how successful you've been in your career so far, is there anything you wish that you would have known when you were our age when it comes to transitioning to the workforce?
If there's anything I would have known, I see. I don't know. It's kind of hard to say because, like I said, when I first started out, when I first got to UCLA, I wanted to get into real estate law, and so that ultimately meant being an attorney. And like I said, ultimately, I didn't end up doing that, which I think is a good thing for me, but I still do a lot of legal things. I'm, working with my attorneys, I'm drafting agreements, I'm negotiating purchase contracts, I'm negotiating ground leases. So in a way, I still got to do what I wanted to do ultimately, which was being an attorney. But I get to be an attorney without having to go to, 3 years of law school. But I think that sometimes when you have a set, you shouldn't have. I think the best thing would be is don't have a set plan and say, oh, if I don't do this, oh, it's just horrible, it didn't work out. With your UCLA degree, the great thing about having a UCLA degree is that it will allow you the flexibility to be able to get into multiple fields, whether it be real estate, healthcare, tech, what have you. That degree, when you show that degree to somebody, they're going to say, hey, you're trainable, and so it will give you the opportunities to dabble and to do different things. So the one thing I would tell you is don't lock yourself in. I know a lot of times we all go into college and we're thinking this is kind of what I want to do, but you never know what might happen. Different life experiences might change your way or what have you, and that's okay. But having that UCLA degree will allow you the latitude to be able to change your directions if you have to. So hopefully that answered your question. Any other questions? All right. Well, I can see.
Sorry.
Oh, okay.
I was waiting for if another one students have more question because I have already asked a question. So,
Sorry.
Like regarding your previous talk, land value. So I was wondering if you could give students like how to determine the land value, how can we like determine like a land value or house property value?
The value of a property?
Yeah, well, why?
What? Well,
Yeah.
there's different ways of doing that. The most common way is what we call comparables. So for what I do, the things that I compare are, if I'm trying to buy a property, I'm going to be looking at other properties within the city primarily most of the time, what they were sold for, and base my offer on those comparables. So if some properties in the neighborhood were selling in the $40 to $50 square foot range, that's what I'm going to base my offer on. The other thing that I look at is, if I'm not buying a property, if I'm doing a ground lease, and basically a ground lease is an agreement whereby McDonald's Corporation or any corporation or person agrees to pay a set amount of rent over a set period of time. For McDonald's, that would be at least a minimum of 20 years. And we try to get what we call options that'll allow us to hold on to the property for another 20 years. So that's why when you drive around and you see that McDonald's that maybe you saw as a kid, and you keep driving around and that McDonald's is still sitting there, that's because we signed a long-term ground lease to allow us to stay there, because, you know, it's a profitable location we don't want to leave. So what I'm doing when I'm looking at a ground lease is I will look at those same comparables and I'll say, well, what did Chick-fil-A pay for on a ground lease for a site down the street? Or what did Raising Cane's pay for a site that might be 2 miles away? And then I'll say, okay, the Raising Cane's, let's say their site's located in a shopping center, and they've got all of these generators, they've got a market, and they've got, you know, I don't know, record store, what have you, all these generators to help them bring business. Well, the site that I'm looking at, I'm just going to be by myself on a corner. So I'll say, okay, I'm kind of similar to what they are, but I need to take into account that they've got some generators that I don't have. So that should bring the value of my site down somewhat. So when I pitch my offer to somebody, I'm going to say, hey, Raising Cane's is paying this, but they've got all this going on, whereas I'm not going to have all this going on at my site. So my site is valued somewhat less. And so that's how, when you're negotiating, you kind of, you know, it's a tug of war with the property owner for everybody to agree upon what the value of a property is. So that's the main way that I look at the value of a property. But of course, there are other ways as well. You can use rental streams of income to determine the value of property. You can also look at how a building, you know, if you're using a building, and determine whether or not the building's a functional building or a non-functional building. You know, we have a lot of buildings, you can look around LA now, that because of what's happened in terms of technology, the internet, a lot of these buildings now are just not functional, you know, and they have a higher land value if you were to use it for something else. You know, a building, you know, you see that with older shopping centers. You know, a lot of the tenants in those shopping centers, you say, well, nobody really goes there anymore. So if you're a developer and you're looking at that property, you might say, you know what, I need to tear down this shopping center and build me like a 10-story apartment building. Because now the land value is a higher and better use. That's a term that we use, of land to make it an apartment building versus having had some shopping center that had been there for decades before.
Thank you. I do have one more question. So McDonald's is a very popular restaurant, and also McDonald's owns a lot of real estate. So you work at the McDonald's for real estate department. So in your opinion, does McDonald's corporation make more money for a restaurant, or make more money for owning real estate?
That's always a big question. I would say that McDonald's primary reason for making money is selling the food. Now, that being said, because we actually own approximately 50% of all of our locations. Some of the locations we can't own because we have them in we're on the ground floor of an apartment building or an office building, or we might be in an airport or something like that, a special use there where we can't own the property. But we do own approximately 50% of our locations. And when you own that location, just like anything, any other piece of property, over time, the equity, the value of that property is going to go up. So we have locations that we bought in the 50s, 60s, 70s, that are worth a lot more now than when we originally owned them. And if we were looking at it from a development standpoint, we could say, well, why don't we do something other than McDonald's? And we could make a lot of money doing it that way. But we're a restaurant company, We use real estate as a vehicle to be able to own the restaurants and a part of our profitability, but we're not in the business to try to develop properties just to develop them. And I will give you one example, though, in which we did do that. Our restaurant in Santa Monica that we have right near the Santa Monica Pier. I don't know if any of you guys know, maybe if you live or if you were in Los Angeles in the area, but at one time, that restaurant was just a McDonald's. There wasn't an office building there. But we were approached by a developer that said, hey, this is Santa Monica and your restaurant is right next to the beach. I could make a ton of money if we developed as an office building here. And we're like, that's great, but there's no way we're leaving our spot here in Santa Monica where there's like a zillion tourists that come like every year and we're making all of this money. So what we did was we negotiated a deal with him whereby he took over the property with the promise that our McDonald's would stay there on the ground floor, and he built an office building there. So if you go there and you see that McDonald's on that ground floor, just note that that office building wasn't always there, that we owned that property. And we decided to say, hey, you know what? We can make this deal work for both parties. We were able to sell it to him, make a pretty good profit on that end, but still maintain our McDonald's.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Jackson.
All righty.
Mr. Jackson, thank you so much for coming to speak to us. I just wanted to know if there's any way that we can get some sort of like contact information so that we can.
I'm gonna type in right now my email address. Oops. Oh, okay. That's that. So that's my email address.
We cannot see it. Oh.
It wasn't public, I think.
Oh, okay. Let me see. Let me do this. Change that up.
It seems like it's not sending. Maybe
There.
I think you gotta click on it. Oh, there you go.
There you go. Yeah. So you guys can email me and I will respond back to you with any questions you might have. Now, just to let you know, last year and this we do have an intern program. Fortunately, we're not running it this year, or we didn't run it last year because of COVID, but we are looking to try to kick it back up again next year. So once that information becomes available, you guys send me your information, I'll make sure I send it out to you. Okay. And then remember too, not just to talk about McDonald's, but there are a lot of other companies out there as well, the Raising Cane's of the world, the other companies, they all do real estate. So, it's lots of opportunities. But I selfishly say, come to McDonald's. It's a great company to work for. It really is.
Yeah, thank
All
you
right.
for
You guys have any other questions? Okay. I appreciate the meeting.